The courtroom in the small town of Cedarville, Texas, was unusually crowded that morning. Usually, custody hearings were quiet affairs, attended by only the lawyers, the parents, and the occasional reporter. But today, something different had drawn the crowd, something extraordinary. The low murmur of whispers bounced off the wooden walls as spectators speculated about the unusual presence at the front of the room. A police dog, German Shepherd, standing tall with sharp, alert ears and a shiny coat that reflected the bright fluorescent lights above. His handler, Sheriff Daniels, held the leash firmly, his eyes scanning the room as though ready for anything. But there was nothing threatening here, nothing dangerous. This dog, Ranger, was there for a child. At Ranger's side, clutching the leash with all his tiny strength, stood a 3-year-old boy named Ethan. His small sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he shifted nervously from one foot to the other. His brown eyes darted between the judge, the lawyers, and the dog he loved more than anything in the world. Ethan's mother, Maggie, watched him closely from the front row, her hands gripping the edge of the bench, knuckles white. She had never been so nervous in her life. Not the night she gave birth, not the time she faced threats from her ex-husband, not even the countless hours she had spent fighting for stability in their lives. None of it compared to this. The judge, a tall woman with soft gray hair and a voice that could be stern but fair, peered over her glasses at the unusual gathering. She had presided over countless cases but never one quite like this. She cleared her throat and the room fell silent instantly. "Good morning," she said gently. "I understand we have some unusual circumstances today. Let's proceed with patience and respect." The murmurs quieted, but the audience remained tense, sensing that something remarkable was about to happen. The prosecutor, Mr. Langford, tapped his pen impatiently, glancing at the dog with an expression somewhere between irritation and disbelief. Beside him, the defense attorney, Ms. Reynolds, took a deep breath, looking down at Ethan with a mix of hope and anxiety. No one had scripted what would happen next. No one could anticipate the small moment that might turn the courtroom upside down. Ethan, his tiny hands gripping Ranger's leash as if it were a lifeline, slowly approached the center of the room. His bare ankles peeked out from beneath his jeans, and his hair fell into his eyes. Ranger walked calmly beside him, every muscle in his trained body relaxed but ready. He didn't pull, didn't bark, didn't growl, only watched, attentive to the boy who had grown up with him by his side. Ranger had been with Ethan through so many sleepless nights, through storms that raged outside their small trailer home, and through nights of tears when Maggie had to leave for work or appointments. Ranger wasn't just a police dog. He was a guardian, a silent protector of a small child's fragile world. Ethan reached the center of the courtroom and looked up at Ranger, the dog towering above him yet seeming so gentle, so patient. He took a deep breath and cleared his throat. For a moment, no sound came. The room was utterly still, the kind of silence where you could hear a pin drop. The judge leaned forward in her chair, curious. Reporters and spectators instinctively leaned closer. Even the prosecutor's pen paused midair. Something about the boy's stance, confident, small but unwavering, commanded attention. Finally, Ethan spoke. "He keeps me safe when I'm scared," he whispered, barely above a murmur but perfectly clear. The words carried through the room like a small ripple growing into a wave. Maggie's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. Tears pricked the eyes of several onlookers. Ranger, trained to respond to danger and command, remained perfectly still as if he understood the weight of what the boy had just said. It was a quiet statement, simple and unadorned, yet the entire courtroom froze. Everyone understood, instinctively, that this was no ordinary custody hearing anymore. The judge's eyes softened. She had seen many things in her career, lost children, broken families, bitter disputes, but she had never witnessed the raw truth of human and animal connection laid bare in a courtroom. She motioned for silence and nodded at Ethan, encouraging him without words. Ethan, emboldened by the gentle acknowledgement, took a small step closer to Ranger, his tiny hand reaching up to touch the dog's soft fur. Ranger leaned slightly, resting his head near the boy's shoulder. The bond was palpable, visible to everyone in the room. It radiated something pure: trust, protection, and unwavering loyalty. The prosecutor, clearly uncomfortable, whispered to his assistant, "Is this legal testimony?" The assistant shrugged, equally unsure. No law dictated how a dog's presence could influence a courtroom. No statute accounted for the emotional weight carried by the steadfast gaze of a child's guardian. Ms. Reynolds, the defense attorney, stood silently, her eyes glistening. She knew the power of what was happening and dared not speak, fearing that words could somehow cheapen the moment. Ethan took another deep breath. His small voice, now a bit stronger, carried across the room. "He helps me when I miss Mommy. He keeps the scary away." The words struck a chord in every heart present. Even the most cynical observer, reporters used to sensational headlines and courtroom drama, felt something shift inside. A sense of awe settled over the crowd. This was not a scene from a movie. This was real, and it was extraordinary. Sheriff Daniels, Ranger's handler, knelt slightly beside the dog, giving a reassuring pat to his flank. Ranger, obedient and disciplined, leaned into Ethan just enough to comfort the child, signaling to the court in a silent but unmistakable way that he was there to support him. The bond between child and dog, forged over months of fear, separation, and danger, was on full display. It spoke of resilience, trust, and healing in ways no courtroom testimony ever could. Maggie's tears flowed freely now. She had fought for this moment for months, navigating the treacherous waters of the legal system while trying to shield her son from fear. Seeing Ethan express himself, vulnerable, honest, and brave, through a few simple words to Ranger made every struggle worth it. She glanced around the courtroom, noticing faces softened, eyes misted, hearts touched. This child, this small 3-year-old boy, and this dog were quietly teaching a lesson that no adult argument could convey. The judge cleared her throat softly. "Let us continue," she said, her tone gentle, almost reverent. And in that quiet, unassuming command, the courtroom understood that what came next was more than legal maneuvering. It was a story unfolding, a story of courage, loyalty, and the extraordinary connection between a small boy and the dog who had become his world. Everyone leaned in, ready to witness the next chapter. Ethan, emboldened by the gentle attention, took one more step forward. Ranger stayed exactly where he was, steadfast, patient, a perfect guardian. The room, previously tense with anticipation and curiosity, now held a reverent hush. For a brief moment, the entire courtroom was united in awe. No one spoke, no one moved, yet the energy was electric. Something remarkable was happening, something that would not be forgotten by anyone in that room for the rest of their lives. The boy's eyes met Ranger, and Ranger's gaze returned with perfect understanding. Ethan's small hand clutched the leash a little tighter. The audience leaned forward. The judge watched with a quiet intensity. Even the lawyers, seasoned in debate and argument, felt powerless to command attention against the pure honesty of a child and the silent support of a loyal dog. In that single moment, the world outside seemed to fade. The story had begun. The courtroom remained silent long after Ethan's first words had hung in the air. "He keeps me safe when I'm scared." Simple, innocent, yet devastatingly powerful. Each syllable seemed to reverberate against the polished wooden panels, echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Maggie's hand trembled, pressing against her mouth to stifle an audible sob. The reporters' pens hovered over notebooks, momentarily frozen. Cameras blinked, capturing an image that could never be replicated. A 3-year-old boy and a police dog, center stage in a courtroom, commanding attention without uttering a single word of legal testimony. Even the most seasoned courtroom observers were caught off guard. Prosecutor Langford whispered to his assistant, his face pale. "Is this actually happening?" The assistant shook his head subtly, eyes wide. No one had anticipated a toddler's words could cut through months of legal argumentation so sharply, leaving logic momentarily powerless. Across the room, defense attorney Ms. Reynolds allowed herself a small, proud smile. She had suspected that Ranger's presence might influence the court, but even she hadn't expected the child's courage to create such a wave of attention. Sheriff Daniels, standing at Ranger's side, gave a subtle nod to the dog. Ranger, obedient as ever, adjusted slightly, leaning closer to Ethan. His large, alert eyes softened, fixed on the boy as though acknowledging the weight of his words. Trained to respond to commands in danger, Ranger now responded to emotion, sensing the child's fear and determination. In that quiet, intimate moment, the dog and the boy shared a bond invisible to everyone else but palpable to all. It was impossible to ignore. Ethan's small frame trembled, and he glanced briefly at Maggie, who smiled and gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. He straightened his back and took a tiny step forward, gripping Ranger's leash tightly. "When I get scared at night," he continued, his voice trembling but audible, "he comes to me, and then I'm not scared anymore." The courtroom shifted in response. The judge leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. Even the skeptical jurors seemed to lean closer in their seats. The emotional gravity of the boy's statement was undeniable. Maggie felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Her son, so small and vulnerable, was standing up for himself, and for her in a way that no adult could have done. She had spent months preparing legal documents, gathering proof of her stability, and attending counseling sessions, but nothing compared to the authenticity of a child's voice, expressing a bond forged in trust and survival. The struggle to keep Ethan safe had begun long before this courtroom day, and now, in a single statement, the child encapsulated the essence of their fight. The room's atmosphere changed subtly. Reporters stopped muttering among themselves, lawyers adjusted uncomfortably, and even the court clerk paused her typing. Ethan, oblivious to the weight of their attention, continued gripping Ranger's fur lightly with his free hand. "He doesn't bark at me. He doesn't growl. He just stays. And he helps Mommy too," he said, looking directly at Maggie, his wide brown eyes shining. Maggie could barely breathe. Her son's courage, honesty, and love for the dog had transformed the room, creating a moment of unity that transcended legal arguments. Prosecutor Langford finally cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Your Honor," he said, his voice strained, "I fail to see how a dog's presence qualifies as relevant evidence in a custody case. We are here to evaluate parental fitness, not affection." The words, though precise, rang hollow. His attempt to reassert authority was overshadowed by the quiet power radiating from Ethan and Ranger. Every eye in the room remained fixed on the boy, and even the judge's raised eyebrow suggested she was not entirely unconvinced by the prosecutor's cold logic. Sheriff Daniels stepped slightly forward, gently tightening his grip on Ranger's leash. Ranger, understanding the subtle signal, shifted closer to Ethan, resting his massive head lightly on the boy's knee. The gesture was understated, but the symbolism was undeniable. Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was a protector, a companion, a stabilizing presence in a child's fragile world. The courtroom absorbed the silent testimony. Ethan was safe with Ranger, emotionally secure because of him, and brave because the dog gave him courage. It was almost a lesson in empathy and resilience, delivered in a single moment. Ms. Reynolds, sensing the emotional shift, finally spoke, though softly. "Your Honor, the bond between a child and a service animal is not just emotional, it is practical. Ranger has been instrumental in Ethan's emotional recovery after traumatic experiences at home. To discount this bond is to ignore months of behavioral therapy and safety measures that have allowed Ethan to thrive." Her words were calm but filled with conviction. The room listened, now fully aware that the presence of a dog was more than mere symbolism. It was evidence of care, consistency, and protection. Ethan, emboldened by the slight validation, straightened further. He looked toward the judge again, his small voice now firmer. "Sometimes Daddy yells. Sometimes I get scared. Ranger makes me brave. Mommy makes me brave too," he said, his words clear, unadorned, and piercingly honest. The courtroom felt the weight of every syllable. Journalists furiously scribbled notes. Cameras flashed, trying to capture a moment that no photo could ever truly replicate. Every person present felt the gravity of a child's trust in his dog, a trust born from months of fear, danger, and uncertainty. Even the judge, known for her stern demeanor, softened noticeably. She glanced at Ranger, then back at Ethan, and gave a subtle nod. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for what would happen next. Ethan, seeing the encouragement, took another small step forward, holding Ranger's head gently with both hands. "I love him. I love Mommy. And he helps us," he whispered, almost shyly. The audience in the courtroom felt an almost tangible shift, from tension and skepticism to empathy and awe. It was clear now, this hearing had changed. No longer was it just a legal dispute. It had become a testament to love, courage, and the extraordinary bond between a small child and the dog who had changed his life. Ranger remained perfectly still, obedient and calm, embodying the silent power of presence and protection. And Ethan, though only 3 years old, had captured the attention and hearts of every adult in the room, reminding them that sometimes courage comes in the smallest voices, and wisdom arrives from the most unexpected places. For a moment no one moved. Time seemed suspended. The murmur of whispers faded into reverent silence. Ethan's words had created a pause in the normal rhythm of the courtroom, a pause that spoke louder than any legal argument ever could. The child had declared his truth, that Ranger kept him safe, that his mother was brave, and that together they could face the world. And in that quiet, powerful moment, the entire courtroom understood that something extraordinary had just begun to unfold. Long before the courthouse doors opened that morning, the story of Ethan, his mother Maggie, and Ranger had been quietly unfolding in a small, rural corner of Cedarville, Texas. It was a story of survival, resilience, and an unexpected friendship that would later awe an entire courtroom. The 3-year-old boy's courage that day didn't emerge from nowhere. It had been nurtured through fear, uncertainty, and the quiet presence of a loyal German shepherd who became more than just a dog. He became a lifeline. Months before the custody hearing, Maggie had been living in a small trailer on the outskirts of town with Ethan. Life had been difficult. She had recently separated from Ethan's father after a tumultuous relationship marked by volatility. The nights were long and often frightening. Ethan, sensitive and perceptive even at his young age, would lie awake, wide-eyed, startled by every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. He had witnessed arguments that left him trembling in corners, listening for the footsteps of someone who might shout again. Maggie's heart ached as she tried to comfort him, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow to her own ears. She wanted to be strong for him, but she also wanted someone who could make him truly feel safe, someone or something that could bridge the gap between fear and calm. It was during one particularly tense evening that Ranger first entered their lives in a professional capacity. The local sheriff's department had received a call reporting a domestic disturbance at Maggie's residence. Officers were on high alert, aware of potential danger. Ranger, trained not just in protection but in search and rescue, entered the home first. The dog moved silently, nose low, ears alert, scanning the environment with disciplined precision. Ranger's handler, Sheriff Daniels, followed closely behind, ready for anything, yet neither expected the scene that awaited them in the living room. Ethan was hiding under a small table, clutching a stuffed toy, eyes wide and trembling. His small body shook as he whispered to himself, "Don't come in, don't come in." Ranger's nose twitched, sensing the fear, but he did not bark or approach aggressively. Instead, he slowly lowered himself onto the floor, resting his massive head gently near the edge of the table where Ethan hid. The boy peered at the dog, unsure, fearful, but something about Ranger's calm presence was immediately reassuring. The dog did not growl or move toward him in a threatening way. He simply stayed, watchful, silent, and protective. For hours that night, Ranger remained near Ethan, shifting only slightly to make the boy comfortable while officers resolved the disturbance. By the time Maggie returned from a short absence, she found Ethan curled beside Ranger, asleep against the dog's warm body. The sight struck her with an overwhelming wave of relief. She realized in that moment that the dog had become more than a protector for the household. Ranger had become Ethan's anchor, a calming presence capable of bringing peace to a frightened child when nothing else could. Over the following weeks, Ranger's presence in Ethan's life became routine. The sheriff's department allowed supervised visits for Ethan, understanding that the child's attachment was therapeutic. Ranger became a constant companion, accompanying Ethan on walks, lying nearby when the boy cried, and even resting his head on Ethan's small lap during moments of anxiety. Each day, the bond deepened. Maggie noticed a remarkable change. Her son's nightmares became less frequent, his anxiety less severe, and his willingness to explore the world around him slowly returned. She had tried therapy, reassurance, and patience, but Ranger's silent companionship seemed to accelerate Ethan's emotional recovery in a way that was profound and unmistakable. The neighbors, too, began to notice the transformation. Those who had observed Maggie and Ethan struggling with the aftermath of domestic instability began commenting on the boy's newfound calm. He no longer shrank at sudden noises, he smiled more readily, and he often spoke of Ranger as if the dog were a superhero who had rescued him from fear itself. Maggie, grateful but cautious, understood the fragile nature of this recovery. She knew that the legal battle over custody was imminent, and that someone would inevitably question her capability as a mother. Yet in those quiet moments with Ranger, she found reassurance that Ethan had a source of stability she could not always provide alone. One particularly poignant evening illustrated the bond perfectly. Ethan had woken in the middle of the night, distressed by a thunderstorm. The boy whimpered under his blanket, fear seeping through his small frame. Ranger, lying in the corner of the room, immediately noticed the distress. He trotted quietly to the bed, lowered himself gently, and rested his head beside Ethan's pillow. The boy reached out, stroking the dog's fur while whispering, "I'm scared, but you're here." Ranger responded with a low, comforting nuzzle. No words were needed. Maggie, watching from the doorway, felt a lump in her throat. That silent, mutual understanding, a 3-year-old and a dog, was evidence of something extraordinary. It was a bond forged in fear but tempered in love. This bond would later become the central focus in the courtroom. When Ethan stood before the judge, gripping Ranger's leash, the years of trust and healing flashed in the boy's eyes. Every step he took, every word he spoke, carried the weight of those past months. Ranger's calm, steady presence beside him was a testament to the emotional growth and resilience of the child. Legal arguments could not replicate this authenticity, nor could they account for the subtle cues the dog provided that allowed Ethan to feel safe and secure. Sheriff Daniels often reflected on the unique relationship between Ethan and Ranger. "I've trained dogs for protection, for search and rescue, for detecting danger," he once explained. "But I've never seen a partnership like this. Ranger doesn't just follow commands, he intuitively knows when to comfort, when to protect, and when to stand still so a child can feel safe." This insight became essential as the legal team prepared for the custody hearing. They recognized that Ranger's role was not merely symbolic, but a concrete element demonstrating Ethan's emotional well-being and Maggie's dedication to nurturing that stability. Neighbors and therapists corroborated the story. Each provided accounts of Ethan's remarkable progress, reduced anxiety, increased confidence, and moments of joy previously unseen. Ranger's influence was consistent, subtle, and profound. The dog had become a bridge, not just for Ethan's emotional development, but also for Maggie's hope and confidence as a parent. It was this backstory that would later leave the courtroom in awe, illustrating that bravery and love could manifest in the most unexpected forms. On the morning of the hearing, that backstory became more than just narrative. It became reality. Ethan's calm demeanor, Ranger's silent support, and the unspoken communication between them carried the weight of months of healing and fear. When the boy spoke those first words in the courtroom, "He keeps me safe when I'm scared," the courtroom collectively recognized the depth of their bond. The audience understood that the story they were witnessing had roots in trauma, in care, and in the extraordinary loyalty of a dog who had become a lifeline to a child in need. Every person in the courtroom felt the impact, even if they couldn't articulate it. Lawyers, reporters, neighbors, and strangers alike recognized the power of genuine connection. It was more than a legal case. It was a story of resilience, of courage in the face of fear, and of the unique, irreplaceable bond between a child and the dog who had taught him to feel brave again. The courtroom air had shifted since Ethan's first words to Ranger. Where moments ago the room had been tense with curiosity, it now pulsed with quiet reverence. But beneath the awe, the legal battle loomed like a storm on the horizon. Prosecutor Langford straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie with a calculated, sharp movement. "We are not here to hear bedtime stories," he said, voice firm but tinged with disbelief. "We are here to evaluate the fitness of a parent to care for a child. A dog cannot substitute for parental responsibility." Maggie's fingers clenched tightly around the edge of her chair, but she drew in a deep, steadying breath. She had anticipated this moment, the skepticism and cold logic of the courtroom, the insistence that her personal circumstances made her unfit. She knew the past would be dissected, her prior relationship with Ethan's father, the temporary housing struggles, the periods of financial uncertainty. Every misstep, every hardship would be scrutinized. And yet, through it all, she had built a fortress of evidence, showing her resilience, her commitment, and the extraordinary bond she shared with her son. Ethan sat quietly beside Ranger, the leash held loosely in his small hands. The boy's gaze flickered between his mother and the dog, the only two constants in his world. Ranger remained perfectly still, ears alert, muscles taut but calm, a living shield of stability. Every time a witness spoke about Maggie's past difficulties, Ranger leaned slightly closer to Ethan, resting his warm head near the boy's legs. That subtle movement, almost imperceptible to most, was everything to Ethan. It was a reminder that no matter what arguments filled the room, he was not alone. He was safe. The judge, experienced and fair-minded, observed the proceedings with a careful eye. She was known for balancing evidence and empathy, and today she faced a challenge unlike any other. The legal debate over custody was now intertwined with the emotional evidence of a child's bond with a dog, an element unprecedented in her career. Ms. Reynolds, the defense attorney, recognized this was her moment to frame the narrative. She spoke softly but with conviction, leaning slightly toward the microphone. "Your Honor, the presence of Ranger in Ethan's life has had a profound impact. The child's emotional stability, confidence, and well-being are directly linked to this bond. It is not mere companionship. It is a lifeline." The prosecutor's face tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. "I fail to see how a dog's companionship outweighs concerns about parental capability. The mother has struggled with finances and housing. Emotional support, while important, cannot replace responsible parenting." His words were precise, designed to sound coldly rational, but they rang hollow to everyone present. The room had already witnessed Ethan's simple, yet powerful statements and Ranger's silent testimony. No lawyer could argue with the visible comfort and confidence the boy displayed in the dog's presence. Witnesses began to take the stand. A neighbor described watching Ethan transform over the months. He used to hide when anyone approached. "Now he greets strangers, plays outside, and laughs," she said, tears threatening her composure. "I honestly think Ranger saved him in more ways than one." Another witness, a child therapist, explained the psychological effects. "Ethan's attachment to Ranger has been crucial in helping him manage anxiety and fear resulting from prior trauma. The child's emotional growth is real and measurable. Without this bond, his progress would have been significantly hindered." Every word from the witnesses seemed to tip the balance subtly. Ethan, meanwhile, remained at Ranger's side, occasionally reaching to stroke the dog's fur. He whispered small reassurances to the animal, words too quiet for the microphone but heard by all in the courtroom. "We're okay, don't worry, I'm safe." Ranger's response was calm, obedient, and gentle, resting his massive head on the boy's knees. The dog was silent yet spoke volumes. Each subtle movement reinforced the argument that this partnership had tangible, real-world benefits. The prosecutor attempted to regain control, asking pointed questions about Maggie's past stability, her employment history, and the gaps in her rental records. "These are significant factors," he insisted. "How can emotional bonds with a dog compensate for structural instability?" Maggie rose to answer, her voice steady yet impassioned. "I have worked tirelessly to provide a safe environment for Ethan," she said. "Ranger is part of our family, yes, but he is also essential to Ethan's emotional health. Without him, my son is anxious, fearful, and unable to thrive. This is not a preference, this is a necessity." Ms. Reynolds allowed a small, satisfied smile to cross her face. She knew the emotional undercurrent of the room was shifting further in their favor. Observers leaned forward. Even the judge's stern gaze softened slightly. Ranger, sensing the rising tension, shifted just a fraction closer to Ethan. The boy's small hand brushed the dog's fur for reassurance, and it was clear to everyone watching that the child's courage stemmed not only from his own resilience but from the silent support of his loyal companion. Then an extraordinary moment occurred. Ethan, emboldened by the words of his mother and the calm presence of Ranger, stood up on his small legs. The courtroom quieted immediately, the air thick with anticipation. He tugged gently on Ranger's leash, guiding the dog to sit directly beside him. "He makes me brave," Ethan said, voice clear and firm. "I'm not scared when he's here, and Mommy is brave too." Gasps echoed through the room. Even the prosecutor paused mid-sentence, as if unsure how to proceed in the face of such simple, undeniable truth. The judge leaned forward, fingers interlaced, her eyes soft. She glanced at Ranger, then at Ethan, and gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to encourage the boy. The atmosphere in the room shifted once again. Legal strategy and formal arguments were still present, but the human element, the raw, unfiltered bond between a child, his mother, and a loyal dog, now dominated the space. The audience, the court staff, the journalists, even opposing counsel, were witnessing something profoundly unique. Witness after witness testified about the effect Ranger had on Ethan. Teachers noted the boy's improved social interactions. Therapists highlighted measurable reductions in anxiety. Neighbors recounted seeing Ethan play outside, fearless in ways he had never been before. Each account reinforced a truth that was becoming impossible to deny. Ranger was more than a dog. He was a stabilizing, protective presence that allowed Ethan to develop courage, trust, and emotional resilience. By mid-morning, the courtroom's atmosphere had transformed completely. Where initial skepticism had reigned, respect and awe now prevailed. Prosecutor Langford's objections began to sound increasingly hollow. Maggie's face, once tense and fearful, now shone with quiet confidence. Ethan's eyes, bright and wide, scanned the room, unconcerned with formalities, focused only on Ranger beside him. The dog remained calm, obedient, and protective, radiating strength without aggression. In every subtle gesture, the audience could see the silent testimony of a bond forged in trust and necessity. As lunch approached, the judge called a brief recess. The murmurs of the courtroom rose into whispers. Reporters exchanged notes, cameras clicked sporadically, and spectators reflected on what they had just witnessed. This was not a conventional case. This was a testament to the power of empathy, loyalty, and courage, and it was just the beginning. The coming afternoon promised even more dramatic turns, as testimony would continue, and Ethan's story and Ranger's quiet heroism would take center stage once more. After the recess, the courtroom reconvened, and the atmosphere had shifted subtly but noticeably. The murmurs had quieted. Every spectator, reporter, and juror seemed fully aware that this was no ordinary custody hearing. Today, a 3-year-old boy and a police dog had captured the room's collective heart. But the stakes were still high. The prosecutor's sharp eyes scanned the room, determined to regain control of a case increasingly swayed by the quiet, emotional power of the child-dog bond. Ethan remained at Ranger's side, tiny fingers gripping the dog's leash, eyes bright but wary. He had already spoken once, declaring that Ranger kept him safe when he was scared, but now a new weight pressed upon him. The witnesses were ready to testify about the months of progress he had made, and the boy instinctively knew that he was expected to respond in some way. Ranger, sensing the tension, leaned gently against Ethan's side, his warm body offering silent reassurance. The dog's calm presence was an anchor for the boy, steadying his nerves as the courtroom braced for the next wave of testimony. The first witness called was Ms. Martinez, Ethan's preschool teacher. She adjusted her glasses nervously, glancing at Ethan and Ranger before speaking. "When Ethan first started at my class," she began, voice trembling slightly, "he was hesitant to join activities. He would cling to his mother's hand or hide when strangers approached. But after spending time with Ranger, something changed. He became more confident. He interacts with classmates, shares toys, and even volunteers to help with classroom tasks. I have never seen a child's emotional growth so clearly linked to the presence of an animal." Her words sent ripples through the room. The defense team nodded, while the prosecutor's pen paused mid-note. The judge leaned forward, her expression softening, as if she could see the small boy growing in courage right before her eyes. Ranger remained still, yet the dog's slight wag of the tail communicated approval, a subtle but powerful acknowledgement of the boy's achievements. Next, a child psychologist, Dr. Henderson, took the stand. She spoke methodically, referencing her months of work with Ethan. "Ethan experienced trauma in his early home life," she explained. "He showed signs of anxiety, fear, and emotional withdrawal. Ranger's presence, however, has significantly mitigated these behaviors. The dog provides a stabilizing influence, offering a sense of safety that allows Ethan to process emotions, engage socially, and develop trust. This is a real, measurable benefit. Without this support, Ethan's emotional and psychological development would be severely hampered." The prosecutor interjected, attempting to refocus the court on Maggie's parental responsibility. "Dr. Henderson, are you saying a dog can replace the need for structured parental care?" he asked, his tone clipped and professional. The doctor paused for a moment, then replied carefully, "No, but the dog complements parental care in a unique and irreplaceable way. In Ethan's case, Ranger enables his mother to provide consistent care by helping Ethan regulate his emotions. It is not a replacement, it is an enhancement." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. She knew all along that Ranger's role had been essential, but hearing it confirmed by a professional reinforced her determination. She reached over to brush Ethan's hair gently, whispering softly, "You're doing so well, sweetheart." Ethan, emboldened by the support and the presence of his steadfast companion, lifted his chin slightly, his gaze fixed on Ranger as if drawing courage from the dog's calm demeanor. Then came a neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who had observed Ethan's growth firsthand. "I used to see him hiding behind the couch when someone knocked on the door," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Now he runs to greet visitors laughing. Ranger changed that. I've never seen a child so attached to a dog, yet so obviously safer and more confident because of it. They are inseparable. That dog saved more than a child's confidence. He saved part of a little boy's life." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the gravity of her words sank in. Prosecutor Langford's objections sounded sharper now, almost desperate, as he attempted to remind the court of Maggie's financial instability, her past housing issues, and the struggles of single parenting. But even his strongest arguments could not overcome the evidence of Ethan's transformation. Ranger's steady presence, the child's newfound confidence, and the combined testimony of professionals and neighbors had shifted the focus from flaws to strength. It was at this moment that Ethan stood again, small but determined. His tiny legs wobbled slightly, but his gaze was unwavering. He tugged gently on Ranger's leash, leading the dog closer. "He helps me when I'm scared," Ethan said, voice clear and unwavering. "And Mommy helps me too, and we're brave together." The courtroom fell silent. Spectators, lawyers, and even the judge seemed caught in the simplicity and purity of the statement. The boy's innocence conveyed a truth no amount of legal argumentation could dispute. That courage, love, and safety often come from the most unexpected sources. Ranger, obedient as ever, lowered himself beside Ethan, resting his head on the boy's small knees. The dog's presence was calm, protective, and unwavering, a living testimony to the strength of their bond. No one needed to interpret his actions, they were self-evident. The prosecutor, flustered, attempted one more challenge. "Your Honor, the child's attachment to a dog is emotional, not a measure of parental capability. This does not override considerations of stability, housing, or income." The judge, however, remained focused on the broader picture. She had seen the boy's growth, the confidence he exuded in Ranger's presence, and the transformation that had occurred over months. She observed Maggie's careful attention to Ethan, the gentle ways she supported him, and the way the child responded to the dog's cues. The courtroom was witnessing a dynamic rarely seen in legal proceedings, emotional truth, human and animal, unfolding in real time. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in similar fashion. Witness after witness provided accounts of Ethan's progress, always referencing Ranger's role in stabilizing the child's emotions. Therapists described measurable improvements in anxiety and behavioral response. Teachers reported increased social interaction and confidence in the classroom. Neighbors recounted witnessing joyful play and independence that had once been impossible. Every word reinforced the same message. Ranger was more than a companion. He was a catalyst for growth, a source of bravery, and an integral part of Ethan's life. By the time the day's testimony concluded, the courtroom had been transformed. The legal argument for parental fitness had shifted from abstract considerations to concrete, living proof of Ethan's emotional health. The boy's courage, the mother's dedication, and the dog's silent heroism had created a narrative impossible to ignore. Every spectator felt it. Even those trained to separate emotion from evidence could not deny the profound impact of what they had just witnessed. As the judge prepared to recess, she addressed the courtroom quietly but firmly. "This case is unlike any I have encountered. Tomorrow, we will hear final arguments, but let us remember the heart of what we are considering, the well-being of a child." The room nodded in unison, aware that this was no longer about strategy or legal maneuvering alone. It was about courage, resilience, and the extraordinary bond between a child and the dog who had changed his life. Ethan, tired but confident, reached down to stroke Ranger's fur one last time before leaving the courtroom. The dog leaned gently into the boy's hand, offering reassurance and protection as they walked out together. Outside, Maggie held Ethan's other hand, tears streaming, pride radiating from every gesture. The day's testimony had revealed something undeniable. The world could witness bravery, innocence, and loyalty, and sometimes the simplest truth, that a dog could make a child brave, was more powerful than any argument. The courtroom had grown heavy with anticipation as proceedings resumed after lunch. The early afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor, but inside, the tension was palpable. Every seat was occupied, journalists scribbled furiously, witnesses fidgeted nervously, and spectators leaned forward, sensing that the next moment might define everything. At the center of it all, Ethan sat with Ranger at his side, tiny fingers still clutching the dog's leash, eyes wide but determined. The boy's presence, so small and fragile, was a silent testament to resilience, yet the day was far from over. Prosecutor Langford rose, voice measured but sharp. "Your Honor, while the court has heard touching testimonies," he began, eyes scanning the room as though daring anyone to challenge him, "we must remember that emotional attachment does not replace tangible parental responsibilities. Ms. Harper has struggled financially, her housing has been unstable, and while therapy and attachments are admirable, they cannot compensate for structural deficiencies in care." His words were precise, designed to puncture the courtroom's sentiment with cold, rational authority. Maggie's chest tightened, her knuckles white against the bench. She had anticipated this line of attack, but hearing it so bluntly reminded her of the stakes. Ethan's small fingers tightened around Ranger's leash. The dog, sensing the rising tension, shifted slightly, leaning closer to the boy. Ranger's calm presence was unshakable, the silent anchor Ethan relied on when fear threatened to overtake him. Every subtle movement of the dog spoke volumes: protection, patience, understanding. It was the unspoken testimony that no lawyer could cross-examine, the truth no argument could undermine. Langford's next words hit the room like a splash of cold water. "Your Honor, I must stress that emotional dependency on an animal cannot equate to parental stability. A child may appear confident under the guidance of a trained dog, but what happens in moments when that dog is unavailable? Who ensures consistent safety and guidance?" His gaze flicked to Ethan. Hopping the small boy would seem inadequate, hesitant, or nervous, but Ethan remained composed. He looked down at Ranger, and the dog's eyes met his with unwavering loyalty. For the briefest of moments, the courtroom felt that silent communication, a small child drawing courage from his protector, a dog offering calm assurance without a single command. Ms. Reynolds, standing at the defense table, leaned forward. "Your Honor, I must interject," she said softly but firmly. "While financial stability is a factor in custody, the emotional well-being of a child cannot be overlooked. Ethan's progress is extraordinary, and Ranger's presence is directly tied to that progress. It is not simply companionship, it is a source of security, enabling the child to thrive." The dog's role, in conjunction with Ms. Harper's parenting, has created a stable environment, one that evidence clearly supports. The judge, a seasoned professional known for her balance of empathy and reason, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. She observed the interplay of tension, the subtle gestures of reassurance between Ethan and Ranger, and the strength with which Maggie absorbed each verbal strike. For the first time that day, even the most skeptical attendees seemed to pause. The courtroom was no longer just about arguments or testimony. It had become a stage for something far deeper: the undeniable power of trust, loyalty, and courage. Then came the turning point. Ethan, sensing the tension, tugged lightly on Ranger's leash and stood, wobbling slightly on his small legs but maintaining his gaze forward. Ranger shifted as well, lowering his massive head to be level with Ethan. The child's voice, tiny yet unwavering, filled the courtroom. "He never leaves me. He keeps me safe. And Mommy keeps me safe too. We're brave together." His words were simple, pure, and direct, and yet they carried a weight that no legal argument could match. The spectators gasped. Journalists paused mid-scribble. Even Langford faltered, momentarily at a loss for how to respond. There was a reverence in the room, an almost tangible awe, as if every heart present recognized the truth in those words. Courage did not always come from strength or authority. Sometimes it came from love, loyalty, and the quiet assurance of a friend who would never abandon you. Ranger, obedient and calm, pressed gently against Ethan's side, reinforcing the boy's courage without needing words. Langford, regaining his composure, attempted to counter. "Your Honor, a child's verbal reassurances to a dog are touching, yes, but they do not address the practical necessities of daily care, supervision, or decision-making. Emotional attachment cannot override material stability or parental responsibility." His voice grew sharper, bordering on frustration, as if he could will the emotional impact away with sheer force. But the courtroom was no longer swayed by logic alone. Witnesses had laid the foundation. Teachers, therapists, and neighbors had all testified to Ethan's remarkable progress, attributing it directly to Ranger's presence. The subtle cues, the way the boy interacted with the dog, the quiet confidence he now exhibited, all of it reinforced a narrative of growth and resilience. Every adult in the room could see it, could feel it, could recognize the truth that surpassed words or documents. Maggie rose slowly, addressing the court with a voice filled with emotion but steady in resolve. "Your Honor, I understand the concerns," she said. "Yes, I have faced hardships. Yes, there have been nights when I questioned my ability to provide. But every day I strive to be better. Ranger is not a substitute for parenting. He is a partner in helping Ethan heal and grow. The love, safety, and confidence he provides are essential. Without him, my son would still be afraid, still hiding, still struggling to trust the world around him. This bond is not just helpful, it is life-changing. A hush fell over the courtroom. The sincerity in Maggie's voice, coupled with the calm, attentive presence of Ranger and the small, brave figure of Ethan, created a moment of undeniable clarity. Even Langford, despite his objections, seemed to recognize the power of what he could not argue against. The child's emotional stability, the measurable progress, and the unbreakable bond between boy, mother, and dog had transcended the sterile bounds of legal debate. Ethan, encouraged by his mother's words, tugged gently at Ranger's leash and spoke again, voice barely above a whisper but perfectly clear. "We're brave. He keeps me safe. Mommy keeps me safe too." The courtroom, already tense with anticipation, now seemed suspended in awe. Spectators leaned forward, absorbing every word. The judge watched with a thoughtful, almost reverent expression. This was no longer merely a custody case. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the extraordinary connection between a child and the dog who had become his guardian. Even the child's whispered words had shifted the energy in the room. Where skepticism had dominated, empathy and understanding now reigned. Witnesses nodded subtly. Reporters paused to capture the moment. Jurors exchanged glances that reflected a shared, silent acknowledgement. This bond, unconventional though it might be, had transformed a frightened child into someone capable of bravery. Sheriff Daniels, quietly observing from the back of the courtroom, allowed himself a small, approving nod. Ranger, ever disciplined, remained perfectly still, sensing the magnitude of the moment. The dog's calm presence had not only supported Ethan through months of fear but now symbolized stability and courage in front of an entire courtroom. Each subtle gesture, a head tilt, a gentle nudge, a steady gaze spoke louder than any words or documents. By late afternoon, it was clear that the battle had shifted. The focus was no longer on minor past difficulties or abstract questions of responsibility. The attention had turned to something far more profound. The undeniable evidence of courage, trust, and love, elements that could not be measured in bank statements or rental agreements, but were no less crucial to a child's well-being. The judge called for a brief recess, her expression contemplative. Everyone filed out, buzzing quietly, aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A small boy, a devoted dog, and a mother united in a bond that had altered the entire courtroom's perspective. For Ethan, Ranger, and Maggie, the challenge was not yet over, but they had proven something undeniable. Courage did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered through a child's voice and a dog's steady presence. The courtroom had settled into an unusual hush. Even the usual shuffling of papers and whispers among spectators seemed to pause as the afternoon sun slanted across the polished floors. Ethan sat upright on his small chair, Ranger at his side, head resting gently against the boy's leg. The dog's calm presence radiated reassurance, steadying the boy like a living anchor in the storm of adult voices, rules, and arguments swirling around him. This was the moment that would decide everything, or at least the moment that would leave the courtroom in awe of a courage far beyond Ethan's years. Prosecutor Langford adjusted his notes, his jaw tight, clearly trying to regain control. "Your Honor," he began, his voice firmer but slightly strained, "while the child's attachment to an animal is notable, we must consider whether it overshadows the mother's responsibility to provide stability, guidance, and structure. Emotional comfort is admirable, yes, but it cannot replace day-to-day supervision and care." Maggie's heart raced, but she remained composed. She leaned slightly toward Ethan, whispering quietly, "It's okay, sweetheart, just tell them what you know. You're brave." Ethan glanced up at her, then at Ranger, who gave a subtle, steadying nudge with his nose. The boy's tiny chest rose and fell with determination. He wasn't afraid. Ranger's presence had given him courage before, and it did so now, in front of everyone in the courtroom. Ethan, small but unwavering, stood on wobbly legs, tugging gently at Ranger's leash. His voice, soft yet remarkably clear, filled the room. "He makes me brave. When I'm scared, he stays. He doesn't growl, he doesn't bark at me. He just stays." The simplicity of his statement struck the room like lightning. Every adult present, from reporters to jurors to lawyers, felt the weight of truth in those words. Courage, they realized, could come in the smallest form, and it was often silent, expressed in loyalty, trust, and love. The judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on Ethan. "And what else does Ranger do for you, Ethan?" she asked gently. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Ethan's gaze never wavered. He looked down at Ranger, then back at the judge. "He protects me, and he protects Mommy too, and he listens to me when I'm scared, and he never leaves me alone, and I love him." A silence enveloped the courtroom. Not the quiet of boredom, but the reverent hush that comes when something extraordinary is witnessed. Spectators whispered softly to each other. Reporters paused mid-note. Even Langford faltered, as if he had never encountered such a combination of innocence, bravery, and truth. Maggie wiped tears from her cheeks, overwhelmed by the realization that her son, her fragile little boy, had articulated a truth that no amount of legal strategy could diminish. Sheriff Daniels, standing at the back with the other officers, felt a lump in his throat. He had trained K-9 units for years, had seen the bravest men and women face danger, yet nothing had touched him like this. Ranger, the dog he had trained for protection, search, and service, had achieved something greater than any arrest or rescue. He had become the anchor for a child's courage, the bridge between fear and bravery. Prosecutor Langford attempted to interject again, but his voice sounded hollow in the charged silence. "Your Honor, while admirable," he began, but Ms. Reynolds, calm yet commanding, cut in. "Your Honor, the child has spoken. This is not about words on paper, figures, or schedules. This is about real, living courage, manifested through a bond that has transformed this child's life. Ranger is more than a companion. He is an integral part of Ethan's emotional well-being." The judge, visibly moved, nodded subtly. "I understand," she said softly. "The court recognizes the significant role Ranger has played in Ethan's emotional development and well-being. It is clear that this bond is essential, not supplemental." Ethan, emboldened by the acknowledgement, reached down and stroked Ranger's fur gently. "He makes me feel safe," he whispered. "And Mommy makes me feel safe too. And together we are brave." Ranger responded with a gentle nuzzle, resting his massive head lightly on Ethan's lap, radiating calm and trust. The visual alone conveyed volumes. A small boy, a loyal dog, and a mother united in courage, their connection palpable to everyone in the room. Langford tried one final argument, his tone urgent. "Your Honor, emotional attachment to an animal does not negate past instability. The court must consider whether the child would be safe in all circumstances, not just when the dog is present." The judge, however, was no longer swayed by rhetoric alone. Her eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the tearful spectators, the nodding witnesses, and the boy's resolute stance. She turned slowly to Langford. "Mr. Langford, the court acknowledges the concerns you raise, but the evidence presented, tangible progress, testimonies of educators, therapists, and neighbors, as well as the child's own statements, clearly demonstrates that Ethan's environment is stable, supportive, and nurturing. Ranger's role is integral, yes, but it complements and enhances parental care, not replaces it." Maggie's hands trembled as she clasped Ethan's small ones in hers. She whispered, "You're amazing, baby, so brave." Ethan smiled faintly, the weight of the moment balanced by the steady, protective presence of Ranger at his side. Then the judge did something almost unprecedented. She invited Ethan to speak once more, giving the boy the chance to articulate in his own words the importance of Ranger in his life. Ethan's eyes brightened. He took a small step forward, leash in hand, voice steady despite his size. "He helps me sleep. He keeps me safe at night. He doesn't bark or bite me, he's nice to me. He makes me brave, I love him, and Mommy is brave too, we're happy together." The courtroom erupted, not with noise but with awe. Some spectators wiped tears away, reporters exchanged stunned glances, and even the lawyers seemed momentarily speechless. The weight of Ethan's words, honest, pure, unfiltered, transcended any legal argument. Courage had been spoken from the smallest voice in the room, yet it resonated louder than any adult's reasoning. Sheriff Daniels, silently observing, felt a swell of pride for Ranger. The dog had achieved what no amount of training, no force of will, could accomplish. He had nurtured bravery, trust, and love in a child who had once trembled at shadows. Ranger's loyalty had been rewarded not with accolades, but with the undeniable bond that now defined a family's life. Even Langford seemed momentarily defeated, glancing around the room as if realizing that no counterargument could match the authenticity of a child's testimony. Maggie, holding back tears, knelt beside Ethan, resting her forehead gently against his. The emotional power in the courtroom had shifted decisively. It was no longer just a legal battle. It was a testament to resilience, empathy, and the transformative power of trust. The judge finally addressed the court with calm authority. This court has witnessed extraordinary testimony today. The bravery of a child, the loyalty of a service dog, and the dedication of a mother cannot be ignored. We will deliberate carefully, but it is evident that Ethan's well-being is intimately tied to the presence of Ranger, and that this bond has fostered growth, courage, and safety in ways that formal documentation alone cannot convey. Ethan, feeling the weight of the moment, reached down to stroke Ranger's fur once more. The dog leaned into the boy's touch, exuding calm, reassurance, and unwavering support. In that moment, the courtroom saw what mattered most. A child who had once been frightened now radiated bravery, a mother whose devotion had been unwavering, and a dog whose loyalty had changed a life. As the court recessed for the day, spectators quietly filed out, reporters whispered excitedly, and witnesses lingered, discussing the unparalleled scene they had just witnessed. Ethan and Ranger walked out together, Maggie at their side, a small but unshakable unit of courage and love. Outside the courtroom, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the trio. They had faced doubt, challenge, and scrutiny, yet emerged steadfast, their bond unbroken and stronger than ever. The day's events would be remembered not for arguments or objections, but for a small boy's words, a dog's unwavering presence, and the courage that united them both. Courage, after all, did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered in a 3-year-old's voice, steadied by the gentle, loyal gaze of a dog who refused to leave his side. The courtroom was quiet, filled with the expectant hum of anticipation. After days of testimony, months of preparation, and countless moments of emotional intensity, the moment for judgment had arrived. Judge Reynolds, a seasoned professional known for her ability to balance logic with empathy, had retired briefly to deliberate. Now she returned, papers in hand, her expression both serious and contemplative. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, the journalists poised, pens and cameras ready to capture history in the making. Ethan sat quietly, Ranger resting beside him, muzzle touching the boy's small knees. Maggie's fingers were intertwined with Ethan, both a comforting gesture and a silent promise that whatever happened, they had faced this together. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as the judge began to speak. "This case has been extraordinary," she said softly but firmly. "It has required us to consider not only traditional measures of parental capability, but also the profound emotional and psychological needs of a child." She paused, looking directly at Ethan and then at Ranger. In the months leading up to this hearing, the court has witnessed a bond that is truly remarkable. The presence of a service dog in a child's life, in conjunction with parental care, has demonstrated a measurable, positive impact on emotional stability, social development, and overall well-being. In this instance, the evidence is clear. The child's emotional growth is directly linked to this bond. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Ethan's eyes widened slightly, glancing at Ranger, who leaned gently against his leg. The dog's quiet presence had been their strength through the storm, and now the court itself acknowledged it. Maggie felt a lump in her throat, a mixture of relief, pride, and awe at what had just been affirmed, the truth of their lives, validated in the most formal of arenas. The judge continued, voice steady. "Moreover, Ms. Harper has demonstrated unwavering dedication to her child, providing consistent care, support, and encouragement. While financial and housing challenges have existed, they do not overshadow the extraordinary efforts and emotional investment she has made to ensure Ethan's well-being. It is evident that Ethan thrives not merely because of physical provisions, but because of the environment of love, trust, and security she has cultivated. Langford's face tightened, his objections silenced by the weight of the evidence and the undeniable reality in front of him. Witnesses had testified, yes, but the true testimony had been in the subtle interactions of a small boy and a dog, in the quiet courage displayed in the courtroom, and in the unwavering devotion of a mother who refused to let fear dictate her child's life. Judge Reynolds took a breath and glanced once more at Ethan. "Ethan, the court recognizes your bravery, your honesty, and the remarkable bond you share with Ranger. It is clear to this court that this bond is essential to your continued growth and happiness." She turned to Maggie. "Therefore, this court finds in favor of maintaining the child's current placement with his mother, Ms. Harper, with continued support for the inclusion of Ranger in his daily life. The child's emotional and psychological needs must remain central, and it is evident that the presence of Ranger is integral to that well-being." A ripple of astonishment and relief flowed through the courtroom. Tears welled in Maggie's eyes as she leaned over and hugged Ethan tightly. "We did it, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan giggled softly, nuzzling Ranger's fur. The dog responded with a gentle nuzzle back, as if acknowledging the moment of victory, their courage recognized, their bond celebrated, their lives allowed to continue together in safety and love. The spectators stood slowly, many applauding quietly, some weeping openly at the heartwarming resolution. Even the prosecutor, though visibly disappointed, offered a respectful nod to the family. "Well done," Sheriff Daniels whispered, approaching from the back of the courtroom. Ranger's tail wagged gently at the familiar voice, acknowledging his trainer while remaining loyal to the child at his side. Outside the courthouse, the sun had begun to dip low, casting golden light across the steps. Journalists scrambled to capture the image. A small boy holding a leash, a German shepherd beside him, and a mother beaming with pride. But more than any photo, it was the energy of the moment, the tangible sense of triumph, courage, and love that lingered. People passing by paused to watch, struck by the quiet heroism unfolding before them. Ethan, small but now radiating confidence, tugged gently at Ranger's leash, prompting the dog to walk beside him as they descended the courthouse steps. "See, Ranger, we're brave," he said, eyes shining. Ranger responded with a gentle nuzzle, tail wagging ever so slightly, validating the boy's courage in a way that only a dog could. Maggie followed, holding both their hands, feeling the weight of every challenge lifted. Later, as they walked to their car, neighbors and friends gathered, some to offer congratulations, others simply to witness the moment. Children pointed at Ranger in awe, adults whispered quietly about the extraordinary courage of a 3-year-old and his dog. Maggie knelt beside Ethan, brushing hair from his forehead. "You were amazing, baby," she said softly. "You spoke from your heart and everyone listened." Ethan smiled faintly, looking down at Ranger. "We did it together," he said. Ranger leaned into the boy, sensing the importance of the statement, the quiet acknowledgement that their bond had carried them through fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That night at home, the trio settled in their living room. Ranger lay across Ethan's lap, head resting gently while the boy absent-mindedly stroked his fur. Maggie sat nearby, watching, her heart full. The battles of the courtroom, the legal challenges, and the tension of the past months melted away in the warmth of their home. Courage, they all understood now, was not measured in size, authority, or words. It was measured in loyalty, presence, and love. Over the following weeks, their story spread throughout Cedarville and beyond. Local news stations covered the courtroom drama, highlighting the unprecedented bond between a child and a service dog. Psychologists discussed the profound impact of animal-assisted emotional support, and reporters marveled at the courage of a boy who had spoken with honesty beyond his years. Ranger became a quiet celebrity, his calm, steady presence capturing the hearts of all who heard the story. But for Maggie and Ethan, the accolades were secondary. What mattered most was the everyday life they now shared. Ethan running through the backyard, laughing without fear. Ranger keeping watch, calm and protective. Maggie guiding, supporting and nurturing her son's confidence. Every meal, every bedtime story, every evening walk with Ranger reaffirmed the bond that had been forged in fear, strengthened in love, and now celebrated openly. Months later, as Ethan played with friends in the neighborhood park, Ranger lying at his side like a silent guardian, Maggie observed quietly. She remembered the courtroom, the tension, and the moments when doubt seemed overwhelming. And yet she smiled, knowing that courage could emerge from the smallest voices and the quietest presences. Ethan was brave, Ranger was loyal, and together they had transformed fear into confidence, struggle into triumph, and vulnerability into undeniable strength. That night, as they sat together on the porch, the golden sunset reflecting in Ranger's fur, Ethan whispered softly, "I love you, Ranger. We're brave." The dog nudged his head gently against the boy, and Maggie wrapped an arm around them both, a family bound not just by circumstance, but by courage, loyalty, and unwavering love. It was a victory unlike any other, not defined by legal documents, not measured by societal expectations, but by the heart, the trust, and the bravery of a child, his mother, and a dog who had refused to leave his side. And in that quiet, golden moment, they all understood. Courage could be small, love could be silent, and loyalty could change lives.